Welcome to Put Simply, the podcast that puts what's happening in the world simply without compromising on the details. Erdem Koch is my name for the second episode of 2025. Welcome back to my co-hosts Rodney McCune and Ozan Ibrisim. Gents, wonderful to see you both. And happy Chinese New Year, happy Lunar New Year to all who celebrate, especially you two who live in the region.
Yeah, it's the year of the snake. Ozan, are you a snake?
No, I'm a horse.
Funny, but more of a racehorse than a workhorse, I would say.
Yes, of course.
I'm a dragon just coming off the end of my stint anyway, so we're straight into the year of the snake. But my horoscope's particularly positive, so positive that it's making me doubt its authenticity, but let's see how we get on.
Well, I saw your horoscope. It's quite ambitious, so I think we'll have to keep a very close eye on it.
Well, the fact it said success in any area was a surprise to me, but it actually has success in many areas. I might be under pressure to do something this year.
I think you might have performance pressure. Yeah.
Well, happy Lunar New Year, happy Chinese New Year to all who do celebrate. And what a start to the Chinese New Year and the Year of the Snake for a little-known company in China, which has launched a product that has completely taken the US by storm in the artificial intelligence space. The product is called DeepSeek, and it is seen as a rival to ChatGPT, which of course rose to prominence a couple of years ago, and of course has had the whole world talking about artificial intelligence in a new way, in a scary way for some, and definitely indicating to most of us that we live in unprecedented times. Rodney, tell us about what is DeepSeek and why on earth did the US react the way that it did?
So I'm going to give you an overview as a non-technical person. I did consult to technical experts yesterday, and after a volume of words and expended time, I'm not sure I was any the wiser. But what I did distill from it is that effectively what they've done is they've produced a competitor product which can do the same or better performing with a lot less energy consumption and therefore a lot cheaper to use. So it's undercut the commercial value of many of its established rivals, which is why you've seen share prices and so on react in the volatile way that they have, because the confidence that underpins those companies and their products has dissipated. So yeah, that's basically where we're at. But it's not. I mean, it's nothing new for China to reinvent products and be able to do so at a more efficient cost. But this is an area where it certainly wasn't anticipated that it would happen in this way at this time. I also did explore whether or not there was a logical approach that was being applied in terms of the innovation, which was cultural or linguistic specific. So I thought that might be an interesting point, but I don't think it is. It seems to be that a lot of these tech people interface with each other within one or two set common languages. So there's no unique cultural or linguistic experience or area where you would approach problem solving in a particular way. So just well done Chinese innovation on this one, it sounds like. Sorry for the guys who had sought to commercialize their products at a much higher value, because it looks like they're on a bit of a downward trend.
It's really interesting in the sense that it also meant that the chip-making giant NVIDIA shed almost $600 billion of its market value on Monday this week, which was the biggest one-day loss in US history. It does raise an interesting question, and I guess a question that we never really contemplated in great detail of the US's efforts to contain China's push for tech supremacy, given that I guess one of its key restrictions was a ban on the export of advanced chips to China. US President Donald Trump has now said this is a wake-up call for US companies who must be focus on competing to win. Obviously, a slogan and some lines that he likes. But Ozan, what I still don't really quite understand is did this blindside the US? I mean, did they just assume that China would not catch up in the AI space, or was secretly sort of starting to lead the AI space, especially given the talk and all these issues around TikTok and national security and whatnot. I mean, did the US just assume that Open AI and ChatGPT were going to be the only ones on the market and they're going to own a monopoly in this space? That part of it doesn't make sense to me. I don't know what your views are.
Yeah, no, look, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me either. And I think it's a bit of a sign of the kind of general sentiment around, US supremacy when it comes to technology. And certainly in recent years, that had been a little bit challenged by the likes of TikTok and others. But it certainly, it's rare that I do agree with President Trump on really anything. But on this one, I think he's right. It is a wake-up call. And it's also a bit of a kick in the guts for a lot of these tech giants who only last week were parading around the inauguration, had probably felt that they were very close to power and things were looking good. And I think it came as a bit of a surprise to them. And I think that they really have to look at their business models in terms of particularly companies like Meta, who are really relying on, I think, AI as the kind of next driver of growth for them, considering that their business model compared to Microsoft and Google and what have you, is probably a bit more limited in terms of where they can get revenue. So I think that's quite a big issue for them. But I think it goes broader than that. I think, and it shows that they've got to be a couple of steps ahead in terms of innovation, and perhaps they haven't been in the last few years. We always look at Silicon Valley as the kind of center of innovation, but it's China's able to do this cheaper, but also, I suppose, and again, I'm not a tech person like Rodney is, but when you do create something that's open source, and able to be replicated in other places, it's difficult to, I suppose, kind of state your supremacy over that technology, because there are a hell of a lot of other people who are very good at this, and I think it really looks like they've kind of shot themselves in the foot. On the other hand, it maybe is a great thing for the world that many people are able to take on this technology and produce something that's more accessible than perhaps what the other companies would be producing, and something that's maybe got a lot more uses and functions for the rest of the world. And maybe that's kind of the democratization of AI, which perhaps is not a good thing. But if you're a shareholder of some of these big companies, and we're relying on very high valuations and great capital appreciation on your investment, etc., yes, you've got to be pretty upset. But then you have to ask the question: it was only probably a matter of time before this happened. Broader questions around, I think, a lot of the innovation stuff is, it's very easy to say that the US has to keep up, and it's a wake up call. Whilst I agree with that, but that you've also got to put action behind these words, and I'm not sure that the current administration is all that committed or geared towards investing in these areas. Certainly, it doesn't look like it is, but time will tell. I think again, the investments that they made or they announced last week in President Trump's first week in office, really looks like an interesting thing on paper. But again, it will be time will tell whether that actually equals any meaningful kind of outcomes.
You know what's interesting? It made me think about, the British history or involvement in innovation over many decades. And the UK has always been very innovative and very good at, finding solutions and harnessing clever thinking in order to sort of move things, invent and so on, and move things forward. But what they've always been poor at, compared to American cousins, is commercialization. And what America's done very well is, whether in aviation or computing or all these other areas, is they found a way to commercialize this innovation that the UK really struggled to do. And I now wonder whether America's commercialization focus is a little bit of what's caused them problems when it comes to this open source approach from China. And if you think about AI as, one of the big areas that people were worried about is what you put in might come out somewhere else. And therefore certain companies or governments want to close circuits. Using this particular piece of technology, you can replicate a closed circuit within a company, a business, a school, or a geographical area, or whatever it happens to be, much easier than would have been otherwise possible. So what we're seeing is maybe a move away from the commercialization point, which is undercutting America, where America got ahead on innovation through their ability to commercialize, over the last, 50, 100 years.
And I think some of the things that we also need to keep in mind is that, we're talking about, I suspect, quite consumer-facing kind of products here. But, at the end of the day, many of these companies are really going to make their money from the kind of defense sector and other government sectors, where I suppose this is where the big contracts are. So, of course, the US is still in a very advantageous position compared to China in terms of being able to support this big ecosystem of AI companies when it comes to, the government use of this and the government functions. And let's be honest, if you're an AI company, you're going to want a government contract, whether it's with the defense sector or any other kind of government agency in the US than probably any other company, because that's, I guess, where the value is. And I think particularly when it comes to defense, a lot of and space exploration, etc., a lot of these companies are relying on big contracts. And that's, I guess, something that we need to keep in mind, that yes, it might well be that China has a more affordable kind of option for consumers, but they're not going to do all that well compared to their US counterparts when it comes to getting some of those lucrative US government contracts.
And an interesting shift in, I guess, consumer and public sentiment, right? I mean, if you think about all the discussions that have happened around TikTok over the last year, particularly around, 170 million users in the US, there was lots of protests in Washington, and, especially when TikTok sort of went dark for, 30 seconds in the US just before President Trump was sworn in for the second time. All these people posted on TikTok saying it's a shame and it's a disaster. And as I said in the previous episode, full disclaimer that I used to work for TikTok up until very recently. But it was really interesting around the people just didn't care about the national security concerns that the US, the Congress basically, and both sides of Congress and both parties really hammered down on, saying that TikTok was a threat to national security. I mean, if that's the discussion around an app that is predominantly focused on effectively providing entertainment and content, to me, it's super interesting to see where the discussion goes around DeepSeek, which the nature of language-based models in the artificial intelligence space, when you think about ChatGPT, is the input that you give it and what you ask it to do for you. And a lot of that stuff, and I use ChatGPT regularly, a lot of that stuff is you are putting in a lot of information voluntarily to, really enhance the commands that you give AI so that it can do what you want it to do and do it to the level that you wanted to do it at. I mean, that to me is just on the surface of the argument that both the Republicans and the Democrats gave on banning TikTok is amplified 10x when it comes to, a platform like DeepSeek. But consumers don't care, right? I mean, it was the most downloaded free app in the US just a week after it was launched. I mean, this to me shows that consumers, surprise, surprise, will go to the newest thing, the new kid on the block, the cheapest thing on the block, and the one that they believe performs best. And having a very brief play before the recording of this podcast between both ChatGPT and DeepSeek DeepSeek has some initial flaws that you can sort of see immediately when you use it, but the speed is extraordinary and it is much faster than what ChatGPT is in its current form. So I think this next stage of discussions will be interesting, and to see what sort of position Trump has on it, given the bipartisan nature of what people believe from a national security perspective in the US in terms of the politicians. It's an interesting chapter that lies ahead.
But I think you're absolutely right. Again, it's the consumer facing kind of function that the DeepSeek might actually win out on. But you've got to ask the question: is that where the money is? I mean, you can draw parallels to Huawei, for example. Again, on the consumer facing products that they had, like phones, etc., they weren't very successful. Sorry, they were quite successful in many countries, but when it came to the things that mattered, like telecommunications infrastructure, that had a much more, I suppose, stronger security considerations. Many countries, for political and security reasons, opted to go with Ericsson and what have you when it came to infrastructure, rather than Huawei, which is obviously the Chinese telecommunications infrastructure company. And you might have a very similar scenario here where consumers have access to these products, but where the money is, and that is effectively government contracts and government procurement, you might see that many of the countries like the US, UK, etc., opt to go with companies that provide them AI solutions that come from, Silicon Valley or UK or some other places.
I think the interesting point, like consumers just say, well, if the Chinese government are interested in my date of birth, good luck to them. If that's so exciting. So they look at the data on an individual basis with the value, and it might be on a population basis and might be on the value of having insights in relation to multiple sets of people and being able to break them down by demographic or something of that nature. So it might not be that individual data points really make any great difference, but collectively it's more interesting. So I don't blame consumers in looking for the free product or whatever and saying, who cares whether they know what the name of my first dog is or whatever it may happen to be that you're to register in any system, right? But yeah, but again, that's just because they don't share the same personal concerns as maybe a government does or a large corporation do. And so on. So yeah, I mean, it's exploiting a natural human instinct, which is if it's cheaper and of equal or better standing, well then why wouldn't I do it?
I think the conclusion here is that yes, it's a big shock to the US kind of sector, but I think that the Chinese have a long way to go before they can kind of break into the more lucrative parts of the longer term lucrative parts of the sector. So I think the US still probably has a significant edge over the Chinese products when it comes to the stuff that actually makes money.
Perhaps that just means the great oligarchs of tech need to just get back to work and stop campaigning and sucking up to Donald.
Or going to dinners at
Ahead of it again.
Mar-a-Lago, yeah, or being at Mar-a-Lago singing, Village People.
Yeah.
Or going to far right rallies like Elon Musk did this week. Rodney, tell us what happened there.
Oh, he turned up in Germany at the successor party to the Nazi party, encouraging them on a live feed from wherever he was, possibly from Mar-a-Lago. Who knows where he was situated. It was a very underwhelming performance. He just said, put Germany first or something like that, and then made one of his sort of strange grunting noises with his hands in the air. But he got a reasonable reception for it. Having followed up for his Roman salute the previous week, he feels like he's on a bit of a roll. What comes next? I've got no idea. But yeah, he's true to form. He's enjoying associating himself with the far right. Not just in America in terms of the Republican base, MAGA base, but also clearly in Europe. And yeah, I mean, what's his objective? Who knows, really? Whether I mean, is it to galvanize that base to create a new dominant media stream to replace permanently mainstream media, to control information, commercial angles, and a push for power himself. Really, he's in a space where he's clearly being asked to be part of these things, which many of us would think are, slightly questionable. But they'll do well in this election. They may well have quite a say in the shape of the next German government. So on that basis, he's positioning himself to have influence in another government. And, from the dominant government in the Americas economically, it becomes the dominant government in Europe economically. So maybe he does have a bigger picture in mind, or maybe it'll crystallize like the plan of a Bond villain over the next 12 months.
I just can't help but think of all these people who have now associated themselves with Trump and, their posts on social media and their self-promotion. I'm thinking of Elon here. I'm thinking of people like Charlie Kirk here. I mean, I just think that there's so much of positioning now happening within the Republican camp of, Trump has this term and that's it. He cannot be elected again under the US Constitution. Now, he has tried to bypass the US Constitution, even with the birthright the birthright executive order that he passed saying that, there is no right to US citizenship just because you were born here, which of course is in one of the amendments to the US Constitution, which can only then be amended through a very exhaustive process, not an executive order. But that positioning that they are doing by showing themselves close to Trump, to me, there's a bigger power play here. I mean, I think we can sometimes be quick to dismiss what these people who are positioning themselves as close to Trump are doing and saying, well, they're absolutely crazy. That may be true if you are just looking at the now, but I think there is to me, a generation or a new generation of non-political types who are now close to Trump, positioning themselves for a debate that will happen, very soon about who effectively will be the new, the new candidate for the Republicans going into the next election. And it's fascinating to watch, and I don't know how much of it is we truly understand by, just by looking at the moment, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's, Elon Musk, I assume, knows what he's doing. The question is, I don't think most of us have much of an idea of his longer term kind of play on this stuff. I think a part of me thinks he's a bit like a little child when, a little child says something funny and the parents laugh and they think, okay, I'll just do this again for the next 10 hours and, try and get the same kind of response and outcome from the parents. And, he's realized doing odd hand movements that resemble kind of Nazi salutes has gotten him extremely significant attention. He's like, okay, I'm on a winner here. This formula works. And I think he's effectively looking at this as however I can break through the noise, however I can create noise. Any publicity is good publicity for me at this point in time. It's not like he's got a political future to think of. He's a business person, and I think he feels that he's onto something with this movement that he's probably right, is growing across the world. And it is a movement that I think, in the kind of old ideological paradigms, we can't help but kind of label as a far right movement. I think there's certainly elements of that, but I think it's broader than a far right movement. I think it's a anti-establishment, a bit of a screw you to kind of authority, etc. This sort of movement, I think, is taking hold across the globe, and I think it's taking hold across the various different ideological, kind of old ideological settings, whether it's people who used to be considering themselves on the left or the right. I think this is something that he's caught onto, and he thinks it's popular, and he may well be right. I mean, the result of the recent US election showed us that people who perhaps wouldn't consider themselves as conservative or far right, etc., saw something in Trump and this MAGA movement that they thought was the right way to go, compared to what they would suppose deem as the establishment Democrats. And I think you're seeing this sort of sentiment across the world, and he wants to be at the forefront of this movement, and he certainly is. My I suppose thinking around whether that this movement is going to last is it kind of, with many movements that have been driven by social media, etc., it lacks a lot of substance, and it's brought a whole bunch of people together that probably share very little in common in terms of policy and substance when it comes to governing. So it could very much lead to a group of people coming together and then realizing actually they don't have a lot of things in common, and then the pendulum may swing the other way, and we may have something that reflects more of what ideology used to look like before Trump. And that's something that's possible, because I think it's very easy to get excited by these sorts of things, and populism by its very nature and its name is it is things that are popular at a snapshot at a time when people have significant grievances, whether it's economic or social. But this is something that I think history has shown us that it's not always permanent, because these things change, and people, I think, wake up and realize that maybe these people are not representing my economic or social interests. I'm going to look at those who may. And this is where the Democrats, I think, need to be very much conscious that we may see in the next few years a serious kind of vacuum when it comes to all those people who thought that these movements would represent them, looking around and saying, okay, they don't. But that's when you need to have the Democrats step up, or the center left in the world step up and say, okay, well, actually, you've flirted with these movements, but this is your home. We're the people who represent your economic interests, and I'm just not confident that they're going to do that.
Well, I think populism has always been popular, as has nationalism.
Yeah.
And I do wonder, Ozan, whether access to data and polling in a huge way in recent decades has allowed not just targeting of messaging, but also a real understanding of where people are at. And perhaps what was edited or censored by mainstream media in terms of more extreme ideology or political thinking, or perhaps even parties and candidates themselves, because they thought it wouldn't land well with certain sections of their voter base. Maybe the access to better and deeper analysis has allowed them to understand that actually it doesn't offend that many people. It galvanizes a large number of people, and it's okay to have a divided, political voter blocks within a country, as long as you're sitting at the head of the largest voter block. So I do wonder whether there's something more than simply mainstream media being undercut by social media, and the editing and self-regulation that's now gone from that space. There's something further on top of it, which is politicians. And let's be honest, we all know politicians, and we know that there's very few who wouldn't say or do anything they can get away with for a vote or to stay in elected position, right? And if that is right, it just feels like they've unearthed the fact that it's okay to be controversial, to be populist, for want of a better expression, and they're chasing that with a level of enthusiasm, because they know that the outcomes are going to be favorable. So what I suspect, sadly, that we are going to see is the center and the left start to move more towards some of the populist thinking with some of their policy points, in order to recover ground that they've lost to the right-wing parties, which are obviously much more comfortable on issues around identity, immigration, tariffs on foreign imports, and all those types of sentiment that others would have shied away from exploiting previously.
I mean, you're absolutely right. You are going to see that, and you're already seeing in the US and other places where people who traditionally were Democrats moving towards and flagging a left wing type of populism. But I'm not. This is my personal view that I think populism, whether it's on the left wing or the right wing, is effectively a way of scamming people, because it's exactly what politicians are very good at, and that is telling people what they want to hear, but then their actions very rarely match what it is that they're talking about. And I don't think there's a great track record when it comes to populism in history where it's lasted. And it's certainly, you look at any other country that's got a populist leader, it's it doesn't last very long, because I think people are, this might be a contentious view, but people are inherently not stupid. They will follow where their interests lie, and populism has never been able to deliver for those people who have, effectively their economic interests probably more closely aligned to what the centre left have to offer around economic justice, social justice, etc., rights of working people. So I think this is a pendulum. I think you can defy gravity, but I think any centre left party that thinks that it's going to break through against this movement with their old way of thinking is fooling themselves. I think you're right, Rodney. I think they might start to flirt around with populist ideas, etc. But in my opinion, it's a pendulum. It's going to swing, and you're going to hopefully see a scenario where it swings the other way as people wake up and realize, actually, I was angry at politicians before because they were not representing my interests and they were lying. So I went with these guys who are, not politicians, and they're all rebelling against the establishment, but actually they're no better. In fact, they might be worse when it comes to other things, because they're not standing up for my interests as much as they say they are. People will start to realize when it comes to action that many of these people are not interested in furthering workers' rights, in furthering economic outcomes for people who are at the lower socioeconomic point, etc. If we're talking about the price of eggs, etc., there is no indication that the price of eggs is going to decrease, and Trump and his friends have made that clear, that the cost of living is going to be very difficult to get down. So I think, yeah, I remain optimistic that this is something that we need to go through, and people need to recognize that these populist policies don't actually represent what they need.
But that means the outcome, just on a final point on this, the outcome then is the swell that there's been in terms of right-wing support or populist support within various voter demographics. They then, rather than going back to the center left or going to the center left, they just become stay-at-home voters, right? Because they just remain disillusioned with all aspects of political life and burned by the person who gave them hope by promising to be different.
It comes down to, yes, I agree with you, but it comes down to what the centre left offer them at that point. When somebody abandons you and goes and tries something else and realizes that something else is not really great for them, they're going to be looking for somewhere. They're going to be looking for a home. And if the centre left offer them what they're offering them today, I agree with you. I don't think they're going to go back. But that's why I say that the centre left and the centre parties have to transform themselves and figure out and basically rebrand themselves and have a rebirth and figure out how they can better represent people's interests. And I think that's the critical part, and that's the part that I don't know. I have very little faith right now with the current political leadership that exists within the centre left and the centre, that grouping is able to be there with open arms when people finish up and realize that actually populism is not the way for me to go.
And they'll struggle to offer something that resonates with those people because, the whole premise is that they offer societal and shared solutions to problems and don't solve the problems of individuals, which is, of course, what the right, through populism, promises largely. And it's going to be difficult for the left to match that or bring enough people back onto that type of these are long-term solutions. These are solutions for us as a grouping rather than me as an individual and so on.
I mean, it's a very, very disillusioned group of people, I guess, or unmotivated group of people where, they are looking for answers and they are looking beyond populism and nationalism, which is obviously such a sort of a, at the forefront of so much politics around the world, particularly in the West at the moment, even in countries where, centre-left governments are in power. You look at countries like Australia that's heading to the elections in a couple of months, and you just see the rise of those populist sort of leaders and statements that come out and they piggyback off particularly what's happening in the US. With Ozan, it's hard to see where the narrative is being shaped by leaders on the other side to, I guess, offer hope for those people who may feel that things are indeed hopeless. But just very quickly before we end for this week, I do want to look beyond the shores and go international for a moment, and particularly turn our attention, as we have been so often on this podcast, to the Middle East and what is happening in Gaza, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who had been displaced because of the Israel-Hamas war are starting to return home to northern Gaza on foot. And again, some of those really heartbreaking images and videos that we are seeing out of that region. Things are delayed because cars are being inspected. People are returning to their homes, finding that their homes are reduced to rubble. We've seen satellite imagery that shows northern Gaza has suffered the worst damage. Hamas-run health ministry says more than almost 50,000 people have been killed since the October 7, 2023 attacks by Hamas on Israel. Where does this sort of now go, particularly under Trump? Does this ceasefire hold up? Do both parties, fulfill their obligations under this particular ceasefire? And is there some sort of hope that perhaps the worst is behind us?
Look, I think it's very difficult to know where this goes, and anybody that says that they've got an idea of how this shapes up is probably lying. I think, generally speaking, the rhetoric that's coming out of the Trump administration so early on is not helpful to what we've always discussed on this show, which is, you need a longer term political solution for this issue to be resolved. And the rhetoric coming out of Trump around, the Gazans should perhaps find another home in neighboring countries like Egypt and Jordan, etc., I don't think gives a lot of hope to Palestinians that the Trump administration is going to be all that supportive of them having a state, certainly in Gaza, where obviously they want to live. So I don't find it's going in the right direction. But it's difficult to tell because one thing again that Trump is right on, that Gaza is a mess. It's been demolished and is not exactly a great place, I suspect, for people to live today. But again, history will tell you that part of the world has on many occasions been destroyed and rebuilt. And it's really, my question is whether there's a commitment from the international community, the US and Europe, etc., to rebuild that and give Palestinians their own state in that area. I don't think that commitment today exists. Particularly, it just again goes to show that Trump himself has no understanding of this region or what history has brought us, and it wouldn't be the first time that a leader has urged Egypt and Jordan to take on more Palestinians, and repeatedly both Egypt and Jordan have not agreed to that for many reasons. I don't think they're in a position to take on more people, but also Palestinians don't consider Egypt or Jordan their home. So you're kind of stuck in a bit of a deadlock situation.
I mean, for me, the people of Gaza, if nothing else, are resilient, and I've no doubt that they will rebuild and get on with their lives. The factor is whether the rebuild goes hand in hand with a growth again in capacity of Hamas to further and future attack Israel or Israeli interests, and whether that continues to be a very significant motivation for Hamas, rather than simply governing and administrating Gaza, if that's what they come back to do. And there's no reason to think that they won't be in a position to do that. The stuff around real estate development project for Gaza just shows how not in touch or out of touch the or naive or inexperienced the Trump regime is. And this is someone who's previously been president, so there's no reason to think that it's going to improve. So therefore, for me, the most interesting factor to watch is what happens domestically in Israel, and where public opinion and political opinion and sentiment there is. Obviously, they're in a position where they've dealt significant injury to both their opponents in the north, and Hezbollah and Lebanon in the south, in Gaza and Iran. That therefore creates space for Israel to go one of two ways, of course, and how much that the government needs to appease the more right-wing elements within the Israeli government is going to be a key factor on how they approach the next phase for Gaza, the next phase for extension of the ceasefire or other release of hostages and or prisoners, etc., etc. So this has all got to be played out, but I think Israeli domestic politics is going to be one of the biggest factors in how things move forward.
And I think, just to finish up on that point, you're absolutely right. And I think even some of those very pro-peace, two-state solution kind of elements within the Israeli community have been saying since the 7th of October attacks that, if you leave it to the Israeli domestic politics, etc., they are very rightfully feeling extreme hurt, and I don't think that hurt is going to go away for a long time. So this is, I think, where the international community needs to step up, and the international community has to play a very active role in ensuring that there's a sustainable solution to this problem. And I'm not sure that forcing Palestinians to live in neighboring countries is all that much of a sustainable solution. And I suspect it may be a temporarily popular solution domestically in Israel. I suspect that those who with a longer term view are probably going to see it and say, well, we're just deferring the problem to another day.
Well, a hugely complicated topic, and one that no doubt we'll continue to keep our eye on as the year unfolds. Gents, thank you so much for your time this week. See you next.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Obviously, a bit of background noise for me today. That was another lion dance thundering past. But at least you get a little bit of an insight into Chinese New Year.
And that's been this week's episode of Put Simply. Be sure to follow us on LinkedIn at Oroka Group to stay up to date with all the latest episodes and news. Feel free to leave a comment and suggestions on what you'd like to see featured on the podcast as well. Until next time, I'm Erdem Koch.
And I'm Ozan Ibrisim.
Thanks for listening.